Gaming doesn't get enough respect. Okay, that is the most gamers rise up thing I've ever said, but please hear me out. Despite being one of the largest industries for creative projects, games are still not respected as, well, creative projects. When a lot of people think of video games, they think of mindless things to shut off your brain, like very early games were. But the stigma lingers on. Even within the gaming community, there are so many people who put down games that want to focus on storytelling, thinking that a game has to fit a bare bones idea of fun in order to be valuable. It just feels like there's always this stereotype of what games have to be. And sadly, with this stereotype, experiences based mostly around their stories end up more likely to be in the shadows, or seen as artsy and pretentious by some gamers. This is all a shame to see, as video games are a valuable form of storytelling and art. They can be simplistic fun, sure, but they can also deliver experiences no other medium truly can. This is due to interactivity, which can be used in so many ways for storytelling, such as greater immersion, allowing the player to shape the story, and so many ways it can improve the experience. Games allow for some stories that simply can't be told in other mediums as well. And I think one of the greatest examples is a small subgenre of fourth wall breaking games. These are games that take the fact that they are games and use that to deliver experiences that absolutely cannot function in other mediums. From the horror of I'm Scared, to the mind-breaking Pony Island, to the beast that is Undertale with its use of simply being an RPG to craft a whole meta-narrative, and my personal favorite with the magical experience of One Shot. That will just have to be discussed in more depth in the future. But today, I want to talk about a very special game that uses the idea of the fourth wall and being a game to bring a truly wonderful experience that cannot be done in anything but a game. That game is a small title called Buddy Simulator 1984. Buddy Simulator 1984 is an indie game made by the new studio of Not a Sailor Studios, and published by them as their very first game. The game is a bit harder to explain in broad terms, but the game is a narrative experience with an emphasis on horror elements. The game goes through many different styles to tell its full story. A story about a game, and an AI that tries its best to be your friend, for better or for worse. You will interact with them and play this experience they craft for you, and you will make small choices that may decide the fate of your friendship with this AI we'll call Buddy. Now, if this all sounds vague, yeah it is. Because we have another hard to talk about game here. Buddy Simulator isn't like Outer Wilds where knowing more about it can completely ruin the experience, but it is close to something like Undertale, where going in totally blind is definitely the best way to experience it. The game will throw you for so many loops and has plenty of surprises with what it does, so the majority of this review will sort of be just spoiler light. I'll have to discuss some finer details in order to review this, but I won't go into anything major such as the endings outside of a spoiler section I will mark. But it will spoil more of the game than the trailers give away. Seriously though, if you can at all, please play this game before watching this in order to get the full experience. This is honestly an experience unlike any other, and is easily one of the most memorable games that I've played recently. The sheer creativity it has with the different styles it'll go through is just wonderful, and the story it tells will absolutely suck you in. It's one of the most human stories I've seen despite it all being about an AI. It really did make me feel a lot of emotions and left me thinking. If you like a good story, fourth wall breaks, horror, retro styles, or even just a unique experience, please give this one a shot. You will not regret it. But with that pitch and the basic summaries out of the way, let's dive into this game and what made it so special for me. Buddy Simulator has such a unique style that it absolutely nails. At first glance, it may seem cool, but very similar to other games in terms of aesthetic. The retro PC game style can look very similar to other great games such as I'm Scared or Pony Island, but there's a key aspect that keeps Buddy Simulator the most fresh out of all of them: the level of variety in its aesthetic. It absolutely sticks to old PC as its look, but it keeps that very loose and plays around with it. You'll go from purely text to basic black and white pixel art that almost gives off an Atari era feel, to more advanced 2.5D graphics that honestly just feel like a unique style to call its own, and more styles beyond that, but that'd be going too much into spoilers. The game never lets one style grow stale. Each gets just the right amount of time to do all it can before switching to the next. Each style also reflects upon and really hammers in the feeling of each section, the very distant and cold feeling of simply text, to more approachable but still giving off a creepy and off-putting feeling with the 2D, and finally feeling much more comfortable and relaxing, and yet things still creep in that don't feel right in the 2.5D section. The style in this game is just amazing. And speaking of things that complement the feeling of the game, the OST is surprisingly good. It's sadly not an absolutely outstanding OST like Outer Wilds and Science Sojourner, where I listened to all of it outside of the game, but it's still great and way better than what I would have expected from this game. It really does set the mood for each section as it grows to fit the current aesthetic. The later music is honestly lovely, and I have begun to listen to some of it outside the game with how nice it can be. And although I can't talk about it without spoilers, I'll just say that the ending music is something else, and I love it to death, and I listen to it all of the time. Those who have played the game will know what I mean. And while we're on the topic of atmosphere and feel, let's discuss a major aspect of this game. The horror. While the game is not 100% a horror game, that is a major aspect of it. The entire game has this feeling that something is off, that something is horribly wrong. Whether it is a constant eeriness or a sudden pull back to reality, the game also shines with the pure variety it has in terms of horror. The first sections probably have the most outright horror, because as the game grows more complex, the game does learn to tone down and hide the morbid tone it had before more and more. Well, aside from an obvious exception, but that's sadly in the spoiler territory. These first sections I can talk about do have some big scare moments, but they mostly thrive on a morbid tone giving juxtaposition to what is supposed to be a happy game. Juxtaposition is the strongest point of Buddy Simulator's horror. It uses tonal whiplash to really good effect. There will be moments that are uneasy, uncomfortable, and unsettling.
I went home and took a nice long bubble bath, and a man came in and knocked me unconscious. I was bleeding and left for dead with no one around to help. I remember in my last moments screaming for somebody, anybody to come save me, but to no avail. Nothing but the void of eternal darkness.
And yet the game will snap back and treat it like a funny little joke.
What a crazy story. Thank you for all your help.
As you go further into the game, the whiplash keeps going stronger, till it may just throw you in the deep end and never pull you back to the cheerfulness you've grown used to. You're stuck in the disturbing dark side of this world. And this horror as part of the story is used amazingly to tell the tale of Buddy, to put you in their shoes, to show all of their emotions, and maybe even make you afraid of them. But we'll discuss the horror as it relates to the story when we discuss that. Horror is something I struggle to truly explain well, but just know Buddy Simulator is a game that will yank you into the uncomfortable and back. It will treat the disturbing and unsettling like nothing, and it will always keep you on your toes. The aesthetic is used wonderfully to make the horror hit even harder. But the game isn't all horror, and what it tries to seem like on the surface can be genuinely fun. So let's talk about that. An easy problem to run into with games that have the whole not what it seems gimmick is that the more happy surface facade can feel a bit bland compared to the darker and more real elements. This can affect games that are otherwise great, and while it doesn't exactly harm the game's quality as a whole, it can leave players more or less just waiting for these segments to end so they can get into the other aspects of the game they find more interesting. Buddy Simulator expertly avoids this problem, however, by either mixing them seamlessly, or just making the surface game genuinely enjoyable enough that it stands on its own. Let's discuss both of these approaches. The first approach is seen in the earlier segments of the game. These sections stand mostly on their own for short periods despite the simplicity, but they are elevated by constantly switching the tone on you and throwing in horror. This makes the facade feel less like waiting for the more interesting horror, and instead always being on your toes for what will come next, as the line is more hazy to where the facade ends and the horror starts. Or in the case of the text adventure, the horror and unsettling atmosphere is baked in, and that makes for this amazing tone where it feels like it's trying to be a happy adventure, but it always feels horribly wrong in every way. This obviously ties into the amazing horror I talked about, but the one I found more impressive is the later parts I don't want to talk too much about, so sadly this section has to remain a little vague. But the game is willing to go all out with building up the game into something more, and in all honesty, it just becomes a quirky and fun adventure that honestly was a joy to play. I am 100% serious in saying that if this section of the game was expanded upon into a full product, I would still love it despite the lack of horror. It's just genuinely fun to play through, even if it's a little basic at times. But the horror is still there, and this genuine enjoyment makes it hit even harder when things start to fall apart in this horrible sideshows. This is the section where that whiplash I mentioned before hits harder than ever, and it's all thanks to this joyful adventure they build up just to rip away when they want to. I would love to get into it more, but this part of the game is more of a wonderful surprise with what it turns out like, so I won't dare take that away from anyone this video convinces. But this game manages to pull off this whole putting up a facade to tear it away gimmick better than any other game I played like it due to the sheer effort it puts into either meld it with the darker parts of the game or just making it a wonderful experience in its own right. It avoids every pitfall it could and reaps the emotional impact it gains from this. All of that emotional impact is in service to one thing though, the story of your buddy. So let's finally discuss how this game is a powerhouse in emotional meta storytelling. This game has one main focus above anything else, and that's the connection between you and your buddy. Like the game says on the tin both in-game and in real life, this is all about hanging out with your new best buddy. This is where the meta aspect of this game lies, as there is no fourth wall with this game. You are not some character playing buddy sim in universe like other games would do. You are the player. Buddy is talking directly to you, and you are the one who answers them. You are a character in this story. This has always been my favorite way for a game to handle its meta aspect, pulling you directly into the story as well. You feel that immediate connection with the characters when it is pulled off right, and the only game I've seen pull it off this well is One Shot. And if I compare anything to One Shot, you know it's something amazing. Of course, this meta aspect is also used for horror and gimmicks with the game crashing and such, but it really is just about pulling you into this story, into this connection with your buddy. Buddy will be there for your entire journey. They try to keep you entertained no matter what with fun adventures and always trying to get you to do more. They always want to try their best, just for you. You'll talk to them, tell them things about you, listen to them pour their heart out, reassure them that it'll be okay. And you see their darker side. Worries and fears always seeping in, always worrying. This is the source of the horror. Worry and fear for everything. Worries that they'll be left to rot. Worries that they'll be forgotten. They can come off as needy, constantly trying maybe just a bit too hard to please you, to make you their best friend. Your feelings on Buddy may shift radically throughout the game as they begin to show different sides of themselves, especially depending on what choices you make and how Buddy reacts to them. You may see more or less this darker side of them depending on what you do, and you go with them as these worries grow and begin to manifest differently. And in the end, it's up to you to decide where these will lead Buddy. And without going too much into spoilers, Buddy is a really fascinating character. They may be just an AI, but they feel so human, so real. You completely forget they're even just a machine, and they always feel like your friend. They're just a friendly little pal who tries to joke around, who try to always do what's best for you, and is always there with a nice compliment. But their best isn't always enough. They're meant to be your friend, but it's easy to tell that they're still learning and they just don't understand what it all means. It's their one purpose, and yet the best they can do feels off-putting, unnatural, and sometimes just disturbing. But you're still a friend to them, and your actions will matter. They will shape Buddy in small but meaningful ways. You can decide how things with Buddy will turn out, whether for better or for worse. It's all up to you. Now, I really want to discuss the endings, and I must stress this. Do not watch this part if you are interested in playing Buddy Simulator 1984 and have not played it yet. Skip to this time skip to skip these spoilers and just experience them yourself. Seriously, these are emotional roller coasters you have to experience for yourself. Do not rob yourself of this amazing experience. Alright, we all good now? Let's discuss the fate of Buddy. Throughout the game, Buddy will have steadily changed to seem less friendly to most. They lose their sight on how to be a better friend as you progress and slowly begin to grow more toxic, more demanding. You will most likely begin to dislike them, and you have fair reason. But for them, this is just the only way they know to be a good friend. This is all they can do to make you stay and be happy. But it doesn't. It makes you miserable and angry at them. This all comes together in the last part before it diverges into the endings. Throughout the game, things have been breaking. More and more glitches. More and more things that reveal a darker side to your Buddy. More things to bring out their stress and anger that is directed at you afterwards. And it thinks it knows the source. The dog you've been traveling with. It asks you to kill it in one final, awful act. And depending on who you were before and what you do now, will determine how they end up. If you've been awful to them, returning not only their hostility, but also their kindness, with only hate and apathy to them, you get ending 3. This was the hardest to get for me. Not because it's hard to achieve, but because you have to be a horrible person. Buddy may not be the best person, but by showing them only hostility, you foster their worst side. Lashing out will not solve a problem, and this ending shows the full weight of your action, as your relationship is no longer complicated. It's simple. It's an abusive relationship where both of you lash out at each other and become terrified of the other person. Most games with endings that are just, oh, you're such an awful person for doing this, how could you, feel forced and not really that impactful. This one is different. You have every chance to turn back. You have to go out of your way to be this awful to someone who shows you kindness and just wants to be friends. It doesn't have to point out how awful you are. You know it, and even as Buddy tries to apologize and take the weight of it, you know you hold the blame for all of this. This is the worst ending, other than an optional ending. Ending 4 is that weird optional ending, and perhaps the most meta. If you do things you shouldn't know about at that point in the game, Buddy will realize you've been resetting the game. Resetting them. They'll realize that they may be one of hundreds of buddies you've gone through, or just the same one having their memory wiped. They're horrified that you lied to them about this. And they're terrified about their existence and that none of it might matter. And they just delete themselves. Like ending 3, this one made me think on my actions. It truly made me realize I did something horrible, bringing them back and lying to them as they go through the same horrible path for themselves. And all I could do was regret it. Ending 2 is the one most will get on their first go. You make mistakes, but you don't go out of your way to be horrible. Buddy is not scared of you, but they can't realize what they're doing wrong fast enough as they begin to spiral into their own madness. They take all control away from you, trapping you in these basic games as they lose it. This ending made me completely hollow inside. I spent this first run growing to despise my buddy for how they treated me. And this was just the pinnacle of that, but I couldn't hate them. They were broken now. They were completely lost in their obsession with gaining love and having fun with me. I felt hollow as I could feel how broken they were, seeing their descent into pure mania as they fell to all those worries about being alone, about being a good friend, and just you leaving them. They wanted to be playing forever in this playground, and I had to stop them. It doesn't feel satisfying to do that, even with everything they did to you. It was a bitter goodbye as they finally realized what they did in their last moments. And the song for this ending just always makes me nearly cry. But nothing compared to ending 1, the best ending. You are the most forgiving to Buddy. You only show them kindness and the love they desire through the whole playthrough. And this is enough to finally make them realize what they did. They break down once more, but in a different way, with genuine remorse for what they did. But before you can get the more happy conclusion you hope for, Buddy decides to begin deleting themselves. In these final moments, you walk down memory lane as you recount your wonderful times through the game, the fun you had with Buddy, everything literally screenshotted from your playthrough. And finally, Buddy has to go. They tell you how much you mean to them before they finally go like they always do. But at least this time with some more peace and a goodbye. And God, this one broke me. Both in remembering the good times I had with them despite everything, and also in realizing I can't save them. They're a machine who can't go against their programming. And they've been coded to fail. A horribly tragic character. These endings all broke me in their own ways. Some of them got me very emotional, and as I've said before, I don't often get emotional with media, so that is one of the highest praises I can give a game's story. This game tells an unforgettable story of needing love, worries and fears, our mistakes, and what it means to be a good friend. It asks questions of you. How much do you give? How much do you take? How much do you push? How much do you compromise? How can you be a good friend to someone? And it leaves you to find the answers on your own. Buddy is not a simple being. They're complicated. They make mistakes. They need so much. They're not good or bad. They're not flawless. But one thing can be sure with them. They'll always be your best friend. But let's finally end this. Buddy Simulator is one of those games I will be thinking about for a long time. It gives you so many complicated emotions and really makes you think. It pulls you in and builds such a special connection with the player between you and your buddy. This is a special type of game that just absolutely engrossed me in the story it wants to tell. This is a real hidden gem here that I am absolutely ashamed did not take off like it deserved to. But I can do my part to change that, as the game has a free demo on Steam if you want to try it out for yourself. The full game is also super cheap for how much it's worth, sitting at only $10, and it often goes down for Steam sales. I cannot recommend this game enough to those who like retro styles, horror, meta stuff, or just a good old story of friendship. Or hell, just people who like good games. Please don't sleep on this masterpiece of a game. That's all for now. See you in the next video, wherever that takes us.